Esther Williams,
Boom, boom, boom.
and also Red Skelton from the film Neptune's Daughter. And maybe in a bit we'll hear Eartha Kitt and Santa Baby as well. I'm Eric Schubring. This is WOJB, and we're broadcasting from Koobie's Coffee. And I want to remind you that our programming is made possible with the support of a variety of business underwriters, including the Lakoutere Ojibwe College. A new name, Lakoutere Ojibwe College. Eliminating the community, but still community involved, of course. It's a non-profit tribal college focused on academic quality, community engagement, and service, and preservation of Ojibwe cultural teachings and knowledge. Now accepting applications for the 2020 spring semester on their website, lco.edu. Registration ends on December the 17th. January 17th, forgive me. And also grateful to the support of Northwind Book and Fiber, located at 205 Walnut Street in Schooner, an independent bookstore and a fine yarn shop, and a gallery of local art and jewelry with toys, games, puzzles as well, and knitting classes and groups meet weekly. Information at northwindbook.com, 715-635-6811. Hours are Monday through Friday, 9 to 5:30, Saturday from 9 until 5, and Sunday from 11 until 3, from 11 a.m. until 3. Again, here we are at Koobie's Coffee, as we are each Tuesday morning between 8 and 9, and of course we invite you to come in and join us for a cup of Java as well. And joining me here this morning is Elaine Smith. She's the Chief Tribal Judge here at Lakoutere. Elaine, good morning.
Good morning, Eric.
Oh, very nice to see you here. And the coffee is hot and it's good.
It is.
Tribal Judge, you've been the Tribal Judge since when? October, or is that?
July 2nd.
Oh my, July 2nd. How time does fly.
Yes.
It is a busy court, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's very busy. I don't think people really understand how busy we are. So I'll talk to you a little bit about that today.
Yeah, the tribal court, how is it different from the Sawyer County Court, the circuit court, or the court system here in the state?
I think the main difference is that we don't do criminal, and so under the Public Law 280, any criminal actions right now will go to the county court, although we do have the power to arrest people and have people jailed for certain infractions like child support, failure to conservation issues, those type of things.
Public Law 280. Can you
Public Law 280 is a law that was introduced, and there were numerous states who opted in to Public Law 280, and Wisconsin is one of them, which means that the state has the power to enforce criminal law on the reservations, whereas states that did not opt in, you'll have like BIA police, and there'll be federal enforcement. So that's the main difference.
You have the power on the reservation, power to arrest, but not court. The court does not necessarily doesn't deal with those things which may be a violation of law outside of the reservation.
Right, like murder, and if you kill somebody or you commit some type of an assault, arson, you will be having to go to county court for those type of cases.
But you have hundreds of cases that come before you.
Yes, we do. I just wanted to talk a little bit about first of all, I'm a tribal member of Lakoutere. I was born in the old Indian hospital many, many years ago. I don't know if people realize that there used to be an Indian hospital in Hayward, and that's where all the tribal members went when they gave birth to their children. And it's now where the Water's Edge is, the nursing home. That's where the old Indian hospital used to be. And I lived here until I was about 4, and then my parents moved to Chicago, which is mostly where I grew up and went to school, and went to law school in Wisconsin, in Madison. And I have about 20 years of experience as a tribal attorney. I worked both for the Ho-Chunk Nation as a tribal attorney and the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe, and as a legislative counsel over there for 13 years. So although this is the first time that I've been a tribal judge since July 2nd, I'm quite honored to be in that position, and I take it to heart. It is a very important role. And the court, I don't know if people understand that the court will interpret the law. It does not create the law. Tribal attorneys will assist the elected officials in drafting the laws, but it's really the elected officials that are responsible for adopting the law and changing the law. But the court's role is just to interpret it and not to create the law. We don't do that. And I wanted to stress that because I think people don't really understand what our role is. And I think tribal courts are important because they're also an expression of tribal sovereignty. When you think about it, tribes are a sovereign nation, and they should have the right to create their own law and enforce their own law, as well as interpret their law. So I think in that regard, tribal courts, they fulfill an extremely important role.
How might the laws be different? Are there some?
There are some differences. For instance, on, let's say, ICW cases or minor in need of care cases, minor in need of care cases. Those cases will be essentially followed up the same way as they are in the county system, but having our own ICW department on the reservation, you become familiar with the different families and the tribal members, the individual tribal members, the children, and there's just more of a connection rather than having these type of cases have to go outside the reservation. So I think it's very important that these type of cases are followed up here. The thing that we have a hard time following up with, the court's that role is to find guardian ad litems at times for many of these cases, and we have a shortage, just as the county does, have a shortage of finding guardian ad litems to fulfill these cases. And they will be in a case for the best interest of the child. And so one of the goals that I have is to do some training for guardian ad litems, and I've been talking to CASA of Wisconsin, which means Court-Appointed Special Advocates. It's a volunteer position, to see if we could enter into some kind of a partnership so that perhaps our tribal members who wanted to volunteer would be interested in being a CASA volunteer at some point in the future.
A guardian ad litem being one who advocates perhaps on behalf of a child.
Right,
client.
they work for the best interest of the child.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not the parent's attorney, or they're not there to represent anybody except advocate for the child, as you stated.
But not an attorney. I mean, this could be.
They usually are attorneys.
Oh, they are.
Right. But there are lay people who are guardian ad litems if they've gone through all the special training. So.
Yeah, I had a friend who was, I believe she was a registered nurse, and I think it somehow managed to qualify to do so and acted as an advocate for a young person.
Right. There is extensive training involved. I also wanted to touch a little bit on the number of cases. As I stated, I started on July 2nd, and the number of cases that the court has heard from July 2nd to October 31st of this year are 447 cases. And again, I don't think people realize how busy the court is. And the case types with the most number are, we have child support, 94 cases in that period of time, a minor in need of care cases, 90, and then our traffic cases, 114 cases during that time. And also within that time period, we've had July had 44 new case filings, August had 125, September had 44, and October had 61. So while we are trying to finalize cases, there are also new filings happening all the time.
Very busy, and perhaps those of us who asked you to be here today didn't understand that we're taking you away from a very busy docket, if you will.
It's a very busy docket.
Yeah. When one thinks of court, the mind's eye has you sitting above, and the defense and the prosecutor. One table here and another there. The physical layout. What does it look like when somebody comes into?
Well, I try to
Into
make
the
people
court.
feel comfortable when they come into the court.
I mean, it is a physical environment as well as just a process.
And by its
place.
nature, I think people are nervous when they come into court, and I think that's very natural because of the physical layout. And that's why I try to make people feel comfortable, and this is their court, and always put my tobacco down in the morning and pray that I can find the wisdom and the knowledge and the ability to be able to hear these cases with compassion, because it's very emotional. Often some of these cases are very emotional, but like in the minor need of care cases, you want to act in the best interest of the children, and you want to be fair at all times and remain neutral. If I feel that I can't remain neutral because I have a family relationship or a personal relationship with somebody, I will have our magistrate hear the case or find a judge pro tem who can hear that case. One of the things that I'm working on is to create a judicial code of conduct, because that is not in place yet. And most courts have a judicial code of conduct, and that tells the judge what the boundaries are, what the expectations are for their ethical behavior. And once that is finalized, it will be reviewed before it is adopted, by legal staff as well as by the tribal governing board. Many of the goals that I want to create within the court are to create more efficiency with record keeping, and I would like to have a system where we could archive old files, because right now our old files are off-site in a storage locker, and it's not a very safe environment because the weather is hard on the boxes of files and so on. And it'd be nice if we could have our own standalone hard drive so that somebody could scan all those documents and we could have them in the cloud somewhere. I'd also like to have a bailiff. We've talked about that with the TGB, and we're just trying to put the budget together and see what that will look like, because there are safety concerns within the court, as you can imagine, and also have other security measures so that it makes the court staff feel safe as well as the people who come into the courtroom.
How many persons are involved? Again, I guess this morning Elaine Smith was the chief tribal judge here at Lakota Ray.
Well, we have 2 deputy clerks, and we have a court clerk, and Bill Trepanier is our court administrator as well as acts as magistrate, and that's the court staff that we have in place right now. We are looking forward next year. There's supposed to be a build-out because we are crunched for space. So we are looking forward to having a little more space. And because right now we have 3 people in one office, for instance. And we also operate a wellness court within our courtroom. So we have the court coordinator who is officed in a little closet. And so we'd like to have some more space.
Again, Elaine Smith is a guest this morning. We're at Koobie's, WOJB, broadcasting from Koobie's, as we do on Tuesdays, and bringing you conversations with folks here at Lakota Ray. Largely, it seems to me of your court cases, not criminal, so it has a lot to do with family issues and matters, but also traffic, right?
Yes, have a lot of traffic cases.
Yeah.
And the magistrate hears all those cases, and if he was here, he could tell you a little bit more. He was not feeling well yesterday, so I think that he's just under the weather today.
And for traffic, if In other words, if one is, of course, there's a police department. If you're pulled over for speeding or some violation and you get a citation, you come in and pay the fine and face the music. Is that?
Or you deal with the tribal attorney who's assigned to traffic, and you can sometimes work out things with the tribal attorney to pay a fine.
Yeah. Well, a personal story. I was pulled over one morning on the way into the station, and I handed the officer my. He was just, checking people out. Who's out at 5 o'clock in the morning? What's going on? And I learned that my driver's license had expired.
Uh-oh.
When was the last time you look at your driver's license? I wasn't checking dates. I rarely ever get it out. And so he was obligated to make note of that officially. And when I went in to pay it at the tribal administration building, I was told, well, I was asked, did you renew the license? I said, yes, I did. I did it immediately. A friend, in fact, the then engineer at the radio station, drove me down to Rice Lake, and we renewed my license that very day. And whomever I was speaking with there at the tribal office said, well, in that case, we're not going to fine you for that. And I thought, well, that's wonderful. And I was told, well, we're not interested in putting people in debt here. I mean, if you took care of it, that's fine. And I thought that was I was grateful, certainly, but the point that what I was told was, we're not interested in penalizing people and making it difficult for anyone who faces a potential fine of, putting you in financial jeopardy or making it difficult for anybody. If they took care of it, that's good enough for us. I thought that was, not only for me, but I think I understood the larger context.
Well, I think they appreciate people who are following through and just trying to correct something that was an oversight, perhaps. And so, they're really not interested to try to get hundreds of dollars out of people who don't have it. So.
Yeah, that you can put people into a financial cycle of debt, a couple $100 fine that you can't pay, and
right.
Further penalty for not being able to pay, and so on. I thought it was a very kind act for myself as well as others.
Right. I agree.
So traffic cases do come before you, though?
Well, the magistrate hears them.
The magistrate.
Right. I don't hear the
And what's the
traffic
difference
cases.
between the magistrate and yourself?
Well, the magistrate is just has limited powers. He's not an attorney, and so there are limited things that he can do. And he's been with the court for probably, I want to say, 4 or 5 years. I think he started under Judge Moore, and then he worked under Judge Schlender, and now he's working with me. So he has that historical knowledge, much more than I do. But I appreciate the fact that I can depend on him to hear different cases. That he may not do it regularly, but he's been able to hear the cases if I need him to. So I appreciate that.
Elaine, when you went to law school, did you aspire at some point to be a judge? I mean, is that I've often thought that somebody's a lawyer and they're in prosecution or defense, and think, I would like to sit on the bench someday and make those decisions.
I had that thought as I started my practice. I think probably when I worked out in Mille Lacs, I started to think that I would like to get some training to be a judge sometime in the future. But when I went to law school, I always wanted to be a tribal attorney. I wanted to work for tribes, and that was my main goal. I was not interested in working in a law firm, excuse me, or working for a corporation. I was not interested in any of that. So that's what I did. Started working for tribes, and I've always worked for tribes.
And as an attorney for a tribe, and as a judge now, of course, but as an attorney for a tribe, what's the role there? I mean, you're dealing within the community, but likely dealing with the interface between tribal sovereignty and the state or the nation.
Well, my role as the tribal attorney when I worked for Ho-Chunk, for instance, was as a housing attorney. I was the only attorney that was housed with the client. The other attorneys were at the Department of Justice up in Black River Falls. And I would go to county court, for instance, and deal with bankruptcy issues or issues of foreclosure. You know, I did the first foreclosure that the nation had. Excuse me. So there was a lot of interesting things that would come up, you know, land issues, issues dealing with elder law. So when you're dealing with housing there, it has overlap with a lot of different type of cases. And when I worked for Mille Lacs, I was a legislative attorney, so I created and drafted laws and amended the laws for the band. And then they would be reviewed by the elected officials. I worked for 4 elected officials in the legislative branch. And there were a lot of different things that I did in that position. Drafted the personnel policies, which are still in use except for a couple of amendments that have been done to them. Worked on an elder policy, and that has been in place, I understand, since that time. There were a lot of different things, and I liked the position because it was always interesting. There were always different things that came to the table for the elected officials to look at, and it was really interesting to kind of be on the front edge of that.
Mm-hmm. But recognizing attorney-client privilege and perhaps some confidentiality that exists in some of the things that I'm sure you have done.
That's
well,
right.
Is there some case or some particular thing that was particularly interesting?
In my
that
position.
Really, that really stands out? You think, you know, back then this occurred?
Well, you know, there were so many things that were going on a few years ago. You know, Mille Lacs had their treaty rights case that was going forward, and there were a lot of issues with the county regarding the tribal police that were extremely interesting in terms of sovereignty issues. And just to seeing the band flex its sovereignty muscle and see how that fleshed out. And it may have taken time, but, you know, they persisted, and things happened.
Yeah. Sovereignty.
Very important.
Very important.
Yeah, very, very important for tribes.
Yeah, recently I was, prior to Thanksgiving, I was reading an article about the history of the event, you know, about Thanksgiving Day, and one of the pieces of that particular story, and it was a history of how did that story develop. This you know, the Puritans and the Wampanoag, and how they came together and what they were perhaps thinking and doing, and who was the more violent tribe. It seems that the Puritans were the more violent of the persons who were at that time. But one of the issues was the nature of sovereignty versus race, if you will. That sometimes Native Americans are seen as a race as opposed to a sovereign people.
Right.
That it's a very important distinction.
It's an important distinction, very important distinction, and I think there's been a misunderstanding. And you know, you're reading today, and I think that people are becoming more aware of how Native people, indigenous people to this country have been purposely erased from the conversation. When you go to school, when I went to school, we didn't learn anything about Indian history. It kind of stopped back in the late 1800s, you know, and nothing moved forward. And, you know, we're still here, and we're here in great numbers, and there was a systemic, deliberate effort to make us disappear. And so that's why I think it's very, very important for tribes to flex that sovereignty muscle, to try to enforce their laws and try to fulfill that government role that's so important for the tribe itself and for the tribal members. Very important. So there's just so much to that whole conversation. I mean, we could go on and on for a long time about that, but I'm hoping that there will be more states, if the federal government doesn't do it, at least more states who will make an effort to teach the school children about the tribes that existed before that state became a state, and what were those people like, and what happened to them. I think that educational process needs to happen.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And how is that expressed, that sovereignty expressed as a part of the work you're doing now as the tribal judge?
Well, as I stated, I think that the tribal courts have an extremely important role, and that is that tribal members feel that they have a court system that is being fair to them and impartial to them, and is creating the decisions that will help them, and that they know that we're being impartial. I think that is the most important thing, that we're looking at the case and we're using the tribal law that's in place, and we are interpreting that case before us using that tribal law. We're not using federal law, and we're not using state law. We're using the tribal law. And I think that is an important expression of tribal sovereignty.
Mm-hmm. Again, our guest this morning, Elaine Smith. She's the chief tribal judge here at Lakota-Ray, and so since July
Yes,
this
yes.
year, since the summer. Gosh, it got cold, didn't it?
Yes. Freezing this morning.
Yes. I could tell when I first rolled over to turn off the alarm.
Did not want to go outside.
It's colder today. It's colder. It's going to be colder today. So mostly, again, not criminal, but people come to you, and how do they arrive? I apologize for perhaps returning to something more basic about the tribal court system. If you get the ticket for speeding on, didn't notice the speed sign, the mile per hour sign, and you get pulled over, that's one thing. You go to you'll be told. You'll get notice when you need to show up.
Exactly.
The other cases, family cases.
Well, family cases, it's very similar to how the county does their notices. For instance, whoever the petitioner is will come in to the court clerk at the front window, and they will request a certain type of form because they want to, for instance, modify child custody, or they want to get a divorce, or I can't think of any other thing off the top of my head, but anyway, then that starts the process, and filing will take place. They'll be given a case number, and then the court clerk will send a notice to the other side and to the party that filed as to when the court date is set, the date and time. And so that kind of starts the process, and then there will be an initial hearing, and the case will proceed from there. And sometimes tribal members cannot afford to pay the filing fee, and so they'll request a waiver of the payment, and they'll have to submit some financial information, and if it's warranted, I'll sign off on it. And, most of the time that happens because people are they're struggling.
Yeah.
They're struggling. Many people are struggling out there.
Well, I want to thank you for being here this morning.
Well, thank you,
so much.
Eric. I
It's good to
appreciate the
see you.
opportunity.
I can remember before you were a lawyer.
Yes,
to
yes.
the radio station some long ago.
Right.
But not so terribly long. You said when you were speaking about the hospital, about the Indian hospital in town in Hayward, you said so long ago. I'm thinking, no.
I think it was
not that long ago.
early 1990s, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, thank you so much, Elaine.
Well, thank you
Great to
again.
see you. Back to the docket. You've got probably plenty of work to do.
I do.
Thank you
I do.
so much. For
Okay,
being
thank
here.
you.
Be well. Elaine Smith, she is the chief tribal judge here at Lakota-Ray.